and welcome to our University Press panel with all kinds of knowledge here to tell us what works. And I'm going to turn it over to Patricia Nelson.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a warm thanks to Calvin and Anne and Valentina at Kaliba and Heather and everyone at Mountains and Plains and the brilliant work our regional associations are doing for our book community. We're really excited to have our panel here today. We have Michelle Malonzo from Changing Hands in Tempe, Brad Johnson from East Bay Booksellers in Oakland, and Jeff Deutsch from Seminary Co-op Chicago. Really finding bookselling is so central to our entwined crises of the moment. Even closed down, booksellers are serving our craving for books in our solitude, and jolted by the imperative to confront race and violence in America, booksellers rally to books that are a necessity. And I think university press books really rise to this complex time. They serve an uncondescending quest for personal seriousness, pursuing all manner of things for the armchair philosopher, the backyard citizen scientist, the bibliophile. And at this moment, reading is our conscience, our weapon, and our prescription for self-transformation. University Press, with its scholarly mission, its integrity of attribution and peer review, is consciously, deliberately building towards an understanding of our contemporary. If you go deep, you will engage with University Press. Right now, I'm finding people are such reading pilgrims. I love all those, what I'm reading now, articles, and naturally I'm hyper alert to any mention of University Press. Tilda Swinton recently on One Grand offered the poetry of Mahmoud Darwish from University of California. This weekend, John Cleese in the New York Times Book Review praising Yale neuroscience, Master and His Emissary. And Helen McDonald, of course, brought much joy to Princeton with Mushroom at the End of the World on her nightstand. But I was really blown away by Michael Eric Dyson by the book in the New York Times. He recommended Martha Nussbaum from Cambridge, Tommy Shelby from Harvard, introduced me to Fred Moten from Duke University Press. And Tayari Jones recommended Christina Sharp's searing book, In the Wake, from Duke. Reading now Joshua Bennett's astonishing Harvard book, Being Property Once Myself. He references Saidiya Hartman's work from Oxford, Beacon, and Norton. And of her, Jessie has said, I don't think I've ever read anything like it. Radical, rigorous, lyrical, attentive, and I think that just about says how I feel about University Press. At Princeton, we are loving a phrase from one of our authors this season, cultivate a team of mentors. And today, we're doing just that, getting to talk about University Press books with brilliant practitioners of bookselling, and hearing from Brad, Michelle, and Jeff. And in fact, it's Brad's website that served as a springboard to our panel. He presents virtual subject categories engaged with the activism of the moment on his website, border studies, indigenous studies, sustainability. And that virtual tour of East Bay Booksellers just totally delivers the store character as a progressive neighborhood indie packed with lively books in a great conversation. Brad comes to bookselling with a doctorate in theology, bringing his own extravagant interests, and has written that he finds in bookselling a job that slips into vocation, which surely must be true for us all. East Bay is intensely attentive to community in his Oakland, Berkeley, Borderlands location, and Brad is very lively on social media, inventive tactics, and often gives academic titles a shout out. So he really makes this cool. Thank you, Brad. So over to you.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. I don't know how certainly am loud about it. University presses have always been a big feature of us at the bookstore. Prior to our being East Bay Booksellers, we were Diesel Bookstore, and which was also, or and still is, a great champion of independent and academic presses. And when I purchased the store with the help of the community, we knew that there would be some changes in the buying, maybe imperceptible to some people, but gradually more so. And I feel like we're now getting to the point where some of the differences are pretty marked in terms of the level of university press buying in particular. And largely this has to do with my own academic background. And my theology degree was an interdisciplinary theology degree, which, I remember in one of my consultations, my professor, who was a practicing theologian, just said, "I don't know why you're not in an aesthetics department, because you don't actually believe any of this stuff." So, which is true. I was much more engaged in the connections that theologies could kind of bear. And for my part with the university presses, I feel like, as Patricia said, that I feel like there's no better place, no more inventive place, not just for nonfiction, not just for the whatever hot button of the day, but also poetry and also world literature in particular. And they are the springboards for, I think I said the other day that they kind of pave the path that the commercial presses end up trotting upon. And if you want to get there first, I feel like you have to go by way of the university presses. And that certainly has proven true for me.
Well, I certainly find wonderful university press books when I'm in East Bay. A Rich Brew on cafe culture in Eastern Europe was a recent acquisition. Against Purity was one we talked about. It's a wonderful and lively mix. And I particularly like just the reflection of university press in so many interesting categories. I've followed your border studies category as an example over the last year of an emerging idea.
Yeah, the border studies section, micro section that we had, it's not quite as there anymore just because there's no browsing in the store, it pulled from all of the sections of the store. So we would have fiction, we'd have poetry, we'd have some kids' books over there, and they were very broadly, sort of addressing the issue of borders, specifically as one of the defining issues, if not the defining issue of humanity right now, in terms of resources, in terms of race, and so on and so forth. And we will continue. We'll revive it when we have browsing. We're actually going to have a second microsection that's pulling, once again, largely from university presses, of trauma studies, which will do this similarly. And we've just, and it's not like we're not just doing this just for the sake of appearance or aesthetics. The stuff sells. It's maybe not necessarily always out of that section, but the exposure to it has proven to be something that we can do, both because we like it, certainly as I like it, and also, from the bottom line level, it actually makes sense for us.
Oh, great. It's a great store. It needs eyes on the books, but fortunately we can get a lot of eyes on your website as well. We're going to turn to Jeff at Seminary Co-op, coming from many years at University of California, Berkeley and Stanford. Jeff is the director of the renowned academic bookstore, membership of over 53,000 customers around the world. Seminary's website gives access to their famous front table of curated new titles. And it bears a witness to the commitment of university presses to works that endure, bringing serious books to scholars and to the general public and readers alike. Jeff has talked about the conversation that we all have together, publishers and booksellers, and offers such a true warmth. He says, we unlikely, impractical, ruggedly idealist proselytizers on behalf of the book. But with really pragmatic wisdom, Jeff outlines Seminary's nimble adaptations to serve at a distance, and very powerfully champions their idealism. His annual letter to membership this year is titled On Endurance. Recognizing this grievous and unfamiliar moment and its threat, he mourns the loss of university press books in Berkeley and of the Penn Center for the Book in Philadelphia. And above all, he reminds us how critical bookstores are to an educated, inquiring, and informed citizenry. So Jeff, thanks for being with us today.
Thanks, Patricia. That was really moving. It's a privilege to be here. As Patricia alluded to, I spent a decade or more in the Bay Area. Still have a 510 area code. Was in Brad's store recently. City Lights. That's around that same time. And really, I just love the book selling community in California. So I'm thrilled to be. Patricia, you said something about, was it an uncondescending quest? That really resonates, and I think that's hopefully the spirit with which I'll share some thoughts about why the university presses are so important to us and to the communities that we serve. So first of all, I just want to, for those of you who don't know the Seminary Co-op, it's a nearly 60-year-old bookstore. It is the first not-for-profit bookstore in the country whose mission is bookselling. It's largely academic, which doesn't mean it's but we scholars and general readers, and what was once upon a time called the serious general reader, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We have a huge space. We're very lucky to have that. In good times, we have 100,000 titles on the shelf, many of which are single copies. And our second biggest section is philosophy, which has over 24 bookcases and just an incredible selection that we're very lucky to have. But I think to Brad's point also, we also sell them. And it's not just about featuring the books, it's finding ways to get those books to the reader. I'm going to say that our model in general, we know is not for everyone. And while our engagement with university presses is deep and wide, there's tremendous enthusiasm around it. We do think that any independent bookstore has if there isn't an engagement with the university presses and the work that they're doing, would encourage anyone to just make sure you know what you're missing, what's not on the shelves. I brought some books. I'm surrounded by books, but I'm hoping I can share a few books if that's okay. And in my home library, so I only have what's available here. There are a few books I wanted to show that I don't have. I think one of the things that I mentioned, the serious general reader. So there's this notion that, once upon a time, there were readers who would just read, academic type books that are not specialist books that stay current in multiple disciplines and have in an anti-disciplinary way, and that serious general reader has suddenly started to fade from view, and it really was a myth. This is what some folks in our industry have talked about, especially in university press world. I know that we not only continue to serve those readers, but there's something of a renaissance happening now in terms of the interest and what people are coming to books for, and those serious readers, which again, the uncondescending part I think is really important, but those who find like great joy and great pleasure in reading texts that might otherwise come off as difficult or abstruse, is really, it's something that so many of us find great fulfillment in. And the crisis in academia, including the humanities and social sciences in particular, means that there are more people, more scholars than ever who followed a spirit of inquiry and a joyful curiosity, and ultimately weren't able to turn that into their specialty, which is curse or a blessing, depending on the perspective. But they are interested in maintaining this intellectual, inquiry and curiosity. So that's a big part of what we do, is serve those readers. We know that the big five, and of course Norton, and of course plenty of small presses have incredible books. So this is not, university presses as opposed to others, but there's a common, between university presses and small presses, there's a common set of values with independent bookstores I think is worth exploring. And I saw there was a write-up in Scholarly Kitchen last week, which is an academic press daily publication, that talked about why, like the value of academic presses. And I just want to list that there were a few words that they used that I thought were really pertinent to us. So one of them, talked about filtration as opposed to curation, and filtration, things like peer review and quality assurance, which Christy Henry, who is on the call, very nice, wow, I was going to mention, has many times called Booksellers some of the best peer reviewers that she knows, which I really appreciate. I think that's a special comment that's, I think, true. Our communities see us that way as well. But the curation piece, thinking about borders or trauma studies and what you're doing, Brad and Michelle, I know what you guys are doing in Tempe, like there's something about that in terms of how we're presenting these books that makes a big difference. And then the other one is differentiation and celebration. So thinking about those two, and they have those as one bullet point, recognizing that it's a different experience coming into any of these bookstores, and it's different because we choose different books, we create a different environment, and that is very much a piece with what university presses are doing. So I think I'll stop there and do just a might bit of show and tell, if that's okay. We have time, I hope. So yes, poetry. So I just want to share a couple of poetry collections and then a few other books. So like one of the best books that's not published by a university press this year is Finna by Nate Marshall, which is his second book. But the first one, sorry, I got all sorts of stuff coming out of it, was the University of Pittsburgh book called The Wild Hundreds. If you haven't read it, it's incredible. Finna's great too. You'll read them both. This is a non-university press book, but since we're talking about the best poetry collections, I just wanted to put Anodyne out there, which is fantastic. You all should get that. And then Angela Jackson, who might be like the most underappreciated living poet. Northwestern publishes her books, her plays, her novel, her biography of Gwendolyn Brooks is Beacon, I think, but they published the rest of her, and it's a fantastic book. Northwestern also has Avery Young, which I don't know if you all can see it, I guess not quite, Neckbone, which is gorgeous and completely like one of the most beautiful books. Anyway, it's just fantastic if you don't have that. Okay, two more things and then I'll stop, I think. Who doesn't want to read more about Ella Baker right now? University of North Carolina has just like the most delicious readable book on Ella Baker, and who doesn't want to read about her? Okay, two more things. Obviously, this isn't just because some Princeton folks are on, but like, who doesn't want to know how to be free and how to drink and how to keep your cool? And they're like dirt cheap at $17. Sorry, I know you're all booksellers too. You'll forgive me a little enthusiasm. And then, okay, so Stanford University Press has a book called Giving Way, which is thoughts on unappreciated dispositions and like thinking about what we care about right now and recognizing that things like modulating and backing down and refraining are unappreciated dispositions. And then Fordham, Power of Gentleness. Who doesn't want a book on Power of Gentleness right now? So anyway, there's like so many incredible books that are out there. Their discounts are good, prices are good, and they really can distinguish the shelves. Okay, I'll stop, but then I just want to say Nebraska, Simone Weil, Gravity and Grace, one of the best books out there. Okay, thanks.
I love this. It's like getting a chance to go to Seminary Co-op, and I haven't been there in person since its sort of Gnostic underground steampunk days, and long to see the new store, and frequently visit the front table, which is fabulous. We'll do some more book sharing in a little bit too.
I have a question in here for, I believe, Jeff. Is that okay to pop in?
Sure.
I think it has to do with what you're talking about with the renaissance of the certain type of reader with nonfiction. Richard says, noticing that my accounts are getting some obscure special orders, scholarly titles, some deep backlists that have gone POD. Are there customers ordering them because sheltering from home, they're doing deeper dives into subjects, or is it because the library is being closed? and scholars/writers can't get their hands on research titles they previously would not have bought but just borrowed?
I'd be curious to hear the answers from others on the panel. I will say that we have, as I said, 100,000 books on the shelf, and we're also getting these obscure requests, which is beautiful. It's a really special thing. So I'm assuming others are experiencing the same.
Yes, I think that at least here at Changing Hands, I think it's a combination of those factors. I think with libraries closed or at limited capacity, it's making things difficult. I think with printing demands and problems that we're experiencing across the board, a lot of books are just harder to come by. And I also think there is a greater desire, I think, to delve deep into subjects that people washed over before. And university press books really provide that in-depth history that has usually been left out of the mainstream.
Yeah, similar. I think adding on to that, at least anecdotally for us, is we have more customers who want to buy from these books from independent booksellers. We're certainly finding that in the event that we have to get something from a press where, and we know that the shipping is going to be, quite high, or the discount really low, most of these customers don't blink about us marking the price up, because there's a patronage aspect to wanting to buy these books from stores that actually believe in them and that actually know something about them. That's at least what we are finding as we become known more throughout the East Bay as a place, as a resource for these things.
I really love this idea of patronage to bookstores that have been fighting the good fight for so long and who understand the books, understand what it is you're looking for. I also have a feeling that people have more Google time on their hands and are getting deeper into a subject than they might have gone before. Really want to get to the source, or maybe if they started with a general idea, they suddenly find themselves really pursuing it, and that will take them to university press. It's wonderful to hear that that is blossoming.
Well, there's also just the fact that there's a growing awareness, I think, in the university press world to have really fantastic readable writers, where it's not just esoteric stuff that you would find deep in your university library. You have amazing poets like Josh Bennett writing, Being Property Once Myself. I mean, that's an incredibly readable thing, and rewarding read in its own right. So the university presses are, I think, if I've not been in the business long enough to know if they're wising up, but certainly in my delving into the worlds, the books themselves are much more trade friendly.
Well, we have deep backlists, so I think pretty wonderful books over many decades, but also a place of discovery, as Jeff mentioned, a place where authors might be nurtured, and you might see them later at Norton, but they might have been discovered at University Press before Basic and before Big House contracts. We're going to move over to Michelle Malonzo, such an astute, savvy book buyer at Changing Hands, which has a mothership store in Tempe, and the First Draft Book Bar, which just reopened in Phoenix. Michelle is a member of the ABA Committee on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She was a judge for last year's Kirkus Prize in Fiction. She's a world-class book spotter and power blurber. She had a recent ASU seminar widening the conversation on politics of publishing, diversity within our book industry, and who gets to write the other. Just days before the pandemic shutdown, Michelle was announced a recipient of a Bookselling Without Borders Fellowship to attend the Bogota International Book Fair. And I sincerely hope that that is in the offing when the skies clear. And Michelle wrote, "Reading beyond ourselves, our experiences, our language and comfort zones is vital to our world. It is important for us to examine and discuss how we in the industry consume, publish, and market international fiction and nonfiction. So Michelle, so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Patricia. You know, the one thing I will add to that is that I am a recovering academic. I was a grad school dropout. I was in a PhD program and it was just not for me. But I think, you know, there is still this prejudice with university press that we think a lot of those books are too esoteric or too dense or too academic for readers. And as someone who buys for really a general bookstore, it's not specialty. You know, we have our university fairly nearby, both stores, but you know, still it kind of varies, that crowd that's coming in. So we're very general. But there are so many gems, and I think Brad and Jeff have really brought that up in the university press world. And I think one of the things to think about with university presses is that they tell the stories that are marginalized by mainstream publishing. And that's key. And that's very personal for me, especially having grown up finding very few representations of myself and my community and my family on bookshelves at many places. You could kind of find those niche topics or what was considered niche topics on the university press list. And I think once we start rethinking our language on how we talk about these books, how we think about these books, how we buy and merchandise them, it will change everything. I think one of the things that I learned, I'm really fortunate that, you know, the owners allow me to take risks and experiment. And as I started buying more university press books, it was, okay, but who's gonna buy them? What are you gonna do with them? You know, no one's really looking for those books. And I said, well, just let me try it, because I'll buy one, seeing as how you think no one's gonna look for it. It doesn't matter if it's not shelved in section, because no one's gonna look for it. And I just included them in all of my displays. I mean, I think when we talk about diversifying our shelves and diversifying how we merchandise for our displays, whatever the theme may be, you incorporate all books. It doesn't just have to be mainstream fiction or nonfiction that you might find in the New York Times. It can also be books from like UT Press. I love University of Texas. Their pop culture and music section is phenomenal, which I would like to point out, Hanif started off with small presses and university presses. And his new book will be published by Random House, but he's been long time small press and UT Press author. And why would you want to miss out on that? You know, another one from Who Would Have Thought, the University of Nebraska list, Res Metal, about the heavy metal scene on the Navajo Nation. Like, I'm not finding these stories anywhere else. And this is, for our community, you know, this is vital. They get to see themselves. We get to learn about, like, who would have thought that death metal was big on the Navajo Nation. And, or, you know, this University of Arizona, shout out to our regional press. One of my favorites is the Literary Guide to the Sonoran Desert, which has, it's like these beautiful, it's hard to find, beautiful illustrations. That's a combination of nature writing essays, poetry, about different aspects of the desert landscape. And when we stack it, we sell it consistently. And these are, in my mind, discovery titles. And as much as we sometimes say as buyers and owners, you know, well, the community kind of helps to tell us what we should put on our shelves, it's a conversation. They tell us and we tell them. And just because they're not necessarily asking for some of these books, we can help them find those books by how we I'm a big on merchandising. I don't think that you can buy without thinking about where you're putting it in your store, even if it's in section. And I think just, you know, even for Halloween, I can't remember the university press, but there was one about like dissecting vampires and like the history of vampires in a particular culture. And I put that on the Halloween display. We sold a few copies. It was perfect. And I don't think sometimes when we're buying or we're setting up our displays, we're not thinking of the breadth of the list that is out there and available. And I think once we start just changing that and really taking the time to look through those catalogs, and that's the great thing about University Press catalogs, right? It's not like the Big Five where it's like 50 pages on Edelweiss you're supposed to get through. You know, it's very contained, it's very easy, you know, and our reps are fantastic and know our stores and help us cherry pick. And a lot of Chicanx history I'm going to find from the university presses, from Oklahoma, even from Harvard and Yale, and a lot that's being distributed by Longleaf and the CDC, more than I am from any of the big names. So just some of the books. I just love university presses.
Thank you. When I was talking to Michelle, she introduced me to Kathy Park Hong's new book, Minor Feelings. And this came out of a wonderful discussion of our mutual interest in Sean Nye's Ugly Feelings, which is one of those books that just gets under your skin and you can't stop thinking about over the years. So that
I read that book and was like, I have to leave academia. I can never do this. This is too amazing. This is everything I've always wanted.
Well, she's pretty wonderful. I think her new book is Gimmick. Another wonderful thing about perennial backlists, deep backlists in a store like Changing Hands, you can find a book like Richard Shelton's Going Back to Bisbee from University of Texas. I'm sure the new Charles Bowden new editions are so fabulous. It's, you know, Red Cadillac, fantastic. I wanted to show off another Southwest book because we're Southwest together. And that's A Radiant Curve. This is Lucy Tapahanso, the poet laureate of the Navajo Nation's beautiful new book, A Radiant Curve, from University of Arizona Press. It's really something.
I'm going to jump in real quick and just say that also that the best university press books, and this has largely to do with the citations and things like that, but they will also, when they work really well for you as a business owner or buyer, they will sell other books for you. So for example, like the anthologies, like Camille Dungy's edited Black Nature. You're going to find such a wealth of possibilities for your poetry section, for your nature writing section, and your customers, if they buy this book, they will say, well, holy shit, I want to order, you know, everything that's in here as well. Other ones would be like from SUNY, This Bridge Called My Back. You'll have like some great Sherry Moraga, amongst others that, again, to Michelle's point, just don't get the bandwidth in the commercial presses until basically they have to. And then another one I'll just toss out as everyone else is showing some books. One that I just adore and that we sell through every time is from Duke, Detours, a decolonial guide to Hawaii. Similarly, it's an anthology with, you know, individual writers, most of whom I don't know, but like the notations are so great that you can really dig into it. And it's wonderful to, I keep it, well, when we had a travel section, I kept it with the Hawaii travel guides, just for that traveler who wants to be very aware about the political reality and the colonial reality of this place that they're going to go enjoy for 2 weeks.
I love the idea of finding more books from bibliography. First thinking of the Res heavy metal book. I guess we're going to have to get that out there with the new Winter Counts novel. We're really getting a new picture in Native American books, many of which are from University Press. I brought a book, a commercial book, because I wanted to show it off for the bibliography. I am a big reader of food history. This book is Cooking Gene, which you've all sold, by Michael Twitty, a fantastic book. But it has probably 30 pages of unbelievable bibliography, and it is all University Press. It is an incredibly deep and lustrous pulling together of what has been happening in food history, Black cultural history, foodways, African traditions, and much of that is coming from University Press. That book just astounds me. I love to read bibliographies. They're like sort of overgrown pilgrim pathways to me. So I was thinking, of course, we're kind of getting in that direction. We have a lot of little ideas we could kind of get into. We've already talked with Brad and with all of you about micro categories or new ideas that sort of arise and start to pull together. They pull themselves together. It might be a display. It might even become a really new topic in the store. This weekend, honoring Dave Graeber, I noticed that Elliott Bay in Seattle and also Downbound Books in Cincinnati posted Instagram stacks of books on working class America, on labor struggle, on Wobblies, and looking closely, of course, books from University of Michigan, Minnesota, California, NYU, and Verso. But the thing is, those titles were there. Those titles were in the store at that moment, and they could bring them forward for this attention, which they were already giving. The same could be true when we, of course, saw such terrifically powerful displays for anti-racism and many other ways of approaching American history at this time. And we've talked a bit about border studies. One thing Jeff mentioned when I was talking to him was rethinking the whole tree of subject categories annually. Like, are you just missing a place to put a book? And I wondered if any of you had found that you needed to put a book away in a new place recently.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's basically, we have very, very general sections, and it pains me when we have to have something really specific, and I just get really squirrely. But like, we don't have a history section, but we will do everything geographically. So we'll have North American studies, Latin American Caribbean studies, African studies, so on and so forth. And like, we try to use studies as the thing to make it as broad as possible. And what that does for us as a staff, it invites us to have conversations when we're shelving books. And I encourage those conversations to be loud, like to project your voice louder than you think you need to. Well, maybe not now, but when you don't want to project your spittle. But at the time, those conversations are actually a means of selling books as well. But we discourse, we disagree about where these books should go, and and whoever wins the the arm wrestling match or whatever, they will move it to that section and see what works. But it's an ongoing thing, and I think it speaks to the conversational aspect that Michelle wrote. I mean, or spoke about. Nothing should ever be set in stone. Nothing works so well in book selling that it should never change. And it should. I feel like it should be a certain level of fluidity to it all.
Absolutely, and I know at Changing Hands, we encourage staff to question our sections and where books are. And if they really think that a book should be moved, then let's have this discussion. A big thing for me is sometimes when I'm going through the calls and the returns, if I see a book that I'm like, no, it hasn't sold for, however long, I really love this book, then I think, where else can I put this? What section can I move it? Is it straddling that history, social issues, divide? Maybe I'll change it to what we call our SIP, our social issues and politics, as opposed to having it in history. A lot of times there's some science books that overlap with our nature section, and our nature section is huge and sells really well. So I'll put it in nature, but if it just didn't work, I'll be like, okay, I'm going to try it in science. So, and we sometimes do double categories, but I think it's that fluidity. Nothing should ever, like Brad was saying, ever be set in stone.
I think anything that also compels a customer to have to ask a bookseller for help. I feel like, you know, I'm not big on seizing people at the door and like greeting them and shaking them how you're doing. But I like my bookstore to be a bit of a challenge. Like when you come in, you're going to need to do a little bit of work. And sometimes, you know, you may not know exactly where it is. And so it's on us as booksellers to intercept those people before they leave, because they've just flung their hands up, not knowing where in the world, you know, XYZ book would be. But it puts you immediately into conversation with the person who's looking for this, and then you can also then show them something else. I don't know. I feel like a bit of a challenge is makes it fun for me anyway.
I really think this idea of sort of framing areas means that once you do have that conversation with your customer and get them to some of the sections that might richly appeal to them, they're going to browse deeply, because it's just different in texture. The assemblage is exciting. It might be a display, but there's a way of bringing them to the idea, or the wellspring of that idea, where books are adjacent. I really love that. We might want to have a little bit of talk about, you know, nuts and bolts, because I know that buying small presses is a little bit different for a lot of booksellers, a little different in scale. And I'm kind of thinking of the Samson and Goliath factor. And this week, Goliath got even bigger, as I understand it. Random House, PRH is, you know, considering Simon & Schuster. So buying university presses is at a very different scale, but it adds this differentiating and intriguing layer to inventory. But it also takes some attention to logistics, to discounts, maybe to distribution, to navigating loopholes, to talking to your sales rep. But I wonder if you all have special ways of making your way through all the university presses, of which we know there are gazillions, or tips.
Patricia, I do want to answer that, but I'm a little bit haunted by this, the conversation aspect that Michelle brought up, and that I think everyone's been talking about. And I just want to heartily endorse this notion that those who come into our bookstores who are looking for something fine, but otherwise we are helping to create that community, and that conversation really does make a huge difference. So it's not just like, what are people asking for? It's what are we showing them that they didn't realize they were interested in, which, you know, these stores do incredibly well. I think it's also important to acknowledge that most readers, including really good, voracious readers, don't follow imprints or publishers, or oftentimes even authors. They're just looking for a subject or a book that looks interesting, and that we are so close to the industry that thinking about the big five, and I mean, so many of the imprints of the big five are incredible, you know, incredible imprints that if they were standalone, they would be doing work that we'd be lauding here as well. And plenty of university presses and smaller presses might not have books for a given community. And, you know, like really thinking about what matters in the community and what can you help reflect is critical. There is a long-standing concern among booksellers, rightfully, about the discounts and how easy it is to get the books. I feel like that is no longer what it once was, and it's really important that we are revisiting that, because especially certainly anyone that Ingram distributes, you already have Ingram accounts for specials on freight and margin that are essentially equal to what you can find from the big five. And to, I think it was Michelle's point, the catalogs are a lot more manageable, and there's a lot less garbage to go through in order to get to the stuff that's good. So the actual work of going through them is a little bit less time consuming.
And I think also what's been so helpful, and this I know has been recent, is the fact that Longleaf and CDC distribute so many university presses and are finally offering free freight. And that has been a huge game changer. I would personally love to get rid of scholarly discounts, but I mean, you know, there are so many trades in there at a regular standard discount that matches some of the mainstream publishers. It's the free freight that is key for us in particular. And now that Longleaf and CDC do have that, you know, making a backlist order, going through Frontlist and ordering direct and not having to rely always on, is Ingram going to have this small book in stock or not, is just really important and vital and helps a lot.
Yeah, and I would add too that one of the things I really like about buying university presses is the expertise of the reps, like Patricia, like Will, who I see in here, Gary Hart, all of the great reps. And you know, it actually, because of these university presses have their own, you know, weird logics and their non-commercial ways of going about doing things, you know, it necessitates the human element of actually working with an individual who knows how to shepherd you through those those arcane processes. They can find you those discounts that you had no idea about. They can, you know, work a little bit of wizardry from time to time, and it really brings a human element back to the process of buying, which when you're in the midst of going through Hachette and all this other stuff, you know, it starts to feel like a mechanical, inhumane sort of act of torture. But this, you know, working with a human being makes it so much nicer. And so I can't say enough about the reps.
We love that. We love you. The best part about the rep bookseller encounter is the fabulous conversations and books about more books that you didn't know about at the time.
I see Paul has asked a question. He wanted to have some nuts and bolts about returns policy. And I'm curious, I'd be curious to hear what Michelle and Jeff do in terms of how long they let something sit. Jeff probably, he's probably, what's a return policy?
Don't want to ask. One of the numbers, I'll share two numbers that we're proud of, that and in all seriousness, hoping that this conversation, as we're thinking about why bookstores exist and what publishers are for, and how important and enduring these books are, I hope that these numbers become more relevant to all of us. So according to Abacus, the average bookstore has a book on the shelf for 130 days approximately. For us, and this includes course books and event books and, you know, front list, it's 270 or so days that they sit on the shelf, and it's a terrible business model, honestly. I mean, part of why I'm saying this is like, this is an idealistic view of bookselling that we think can be a reality, which is why we went to that not-for-profit model. But if, you know, there are financial considerations, obviously it's a little bit tougher. But the other number that's really important, and I think it's actually, again, like, these books will sell if they're on the shelf. There's nothing that says a book only has 90 days to sell, and otherwise it should be returned. Obviously, all the books that we've shown, we expect will be around in a decade or you know, more. Is that let's see, we had 16,000 titles that we sold last year, and of those titles, more than 60% were one book, like one copy to one person, and that was it for the year. And to think about how many books we could sell that are sitting on the shelf that otherwise might be sitting in a warehouse, and to think about how all of us are getting these orders for obscure books that we've never carried, and we are looking at catalogs all the time, and we don't even know some of the abundance of incredible literature and anyway that we could have, and that there should be a model for. So, like, Paul's question is right, like, what about returns? So for a store that's small, like City Lights, you know, in terms of spaces, like making sure that everything turns over quickly and earns its keep, so to speak, is critical. I'd be very curious to hear Michelle and what it's like with the used books and you know, having other you know, models, but ours obviously is not to be followed by everyone. Hopefully it'll become more common.
So for returns, I would say for university press books, and this is not an exact science, it's, you know, so much of the buying is both on the data and, I hate to say, the gut feeling. I hate that, but it's also true, and just your intuition. I would say it can be anywhere from 6 to 8 months, but it also depends on like when it was bought, you know, and there are some books that I might keep longer than that 8 months because I'm like, oh, but we're approaching fourth quarter. I'm going to include it in this, this, and this. Or no, I don't want to return that just yet because I hear these conversations percolating and I'm going to be creating a display, or I'm going to create something in which to help engage those conversations with our customers. And again, it's also just like the changing of the section codes if it's a book that I really care about. And some, like, you know, our Native American section is this one tiny, skinny case in our history section. And, you know, you don't want that, that section, it takes time. It takes time and you have to allow it room to breathe to sell. So you don't want to call it too history. It's like the same with, even though it's not university press, like we have a Western genre section. We maybe sell a couple books a year, but I can't, like, we have to, because if we get rid of it, our customers will be very upset. But, you know, I think the other thing is when you're going through those catalogs, you know, because I am trusted, because they trust me on taking chances, but taking smart chances and being responsible to know when enough is enough and when something's not working, I am very careful with the chances I take. And I think, you know, the thing that Gail said to me when I first started that still haunts me when I buy, you buy it, you sell it. And so I constantly think with every book I buy, what am I doing with this? How am I going to make this work in the store? And if I've tried a couple of experiments and they failed, then I think, okay, well, you know, I have a way of flagging it in Edelweiss and tagging it just so I don't lose it. It doesn't, you know, get lost in the abyss. So if a topic or a certain thing comes up, I could be like, oh, maybe now it'll work. Maybe I can try it one more time. So it's, I don't know if that really helps, but.
Yeah.
We probably keep books too long as well, if it's any consolation, Jeff. Some of it has to do with the fact that, you know, we just get lazy, but also, you know, it is like, you know, we're buying single copies of these things. And like Michelle says, you know, when I buy it, I'm trying to envision a way to sell it. And, you know, if it's just lived in the section for, you know, the middle of the summer, have I done right by that book, right? So like, you know, it's just there. I've not actually tried to sell it. And you don't just try to sell it by way of having a stack. That's, to me, that's just an outdated way of trying to sell books. You know, you do come up with creative ways of merchandising online or mixing it in with other stuff. But by and large, with university press stuff, we will keep single copies probably at least 10 months and normally longer. Our biggest problem has always been keeping them too long that we then get stuck with them because there's a return by date for some of these things of 2 years sometimes or whatever. And there have been occasions where we're just, okay, you know, we thought we were better than what we could not sell that, you know, that piece of arcane knowledge about Aztec map making or whatever. That's actually a literal book that we've had on the shelf for about 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 months, 2 years. But yeah, I don't know. I will always err on giving it more time.
I want to just very quickly, also the statistic I was sharing about 60% being single copies of books for us, that is meant to highlight that books earn their keep sitting on the shelf by enhancing the browsing experience and helping to sell other books. And then ultimately they do sell. And so like really figuring out what your turn should be for single copy university press books as opposed to a front list media driven title they're serving different purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a little conversation going on in the chat about backlist, which I'm reading as I'm listening, and that's the thing that keeps me so invested in university presses. Not the thing. I think I've said that's the thing a few times now. But like, the big thing for me is the richness of the backlist, and that it can actually increase the percentage of backlist that we can have in the store, because increasingly those are the things that people are contacting me about. You know, they are looking for that 15% Ingram discount academic press book that was published in 2005. You know, they're not looking for the for the bleeding edge 2020. Hey, I have 3 of those. That's great. No one's ever asking me about that. So but actually, you know, not trying to anticipate what those weird searches are going to be, but actually, like Jeff says, creating a section that has that stuff is its own reward and is its own way of kind of creating these sort of synapse moments in people's brains towards other topics and to other books.
One thing I'd like to talk about there is just the extraordinary surprises that are in so many university presses, kind of built deeply into their mission. We've already talked a little bit about literature and translation from Michelle, from Brad, incredible richness from many presses, University of Texas, Yale, NYU, poetry from Pittsburgh, from Arizona, Yale's Younger Poet Prize. Creative nonfiction has a special place at University of Georgia, and the Flannery O'Connor Award in Short Fiction is from there. The Muse Project in Iowa. I was thinking of how much you can be surprised by what university presses have, and also what might endure in their backlist that you could bring forward again. I was looking at Instagram, and Brad had posted a University of Minnesota book, Plants Have So Much to Give Us, All We Have to Do Is Ask. He's already sold me the book, and it's obviously for the braided sweetgrass reader. It's just a gem. I think we find these gems and that sense of enduring backlist, and I hope as reps, we have enough strategies to resell you backlist or remind you, and we would love inspiration for how to bring those forward again, because I think we often buy off the top and don't buy from the back, as we have in the chat discussion. Do you all find books of that kind that, you know, when you think about University, you know, of West Virginia or something, there's something there that comes to mind again?
Yeah, I mean, during as you know, as everyone is coming up with these anti-racist reading lists, and most of them just had many of the same things on there, which was, you know, was great in terms of, you know, moving units of those books. But we were pretty committed to wanting to have, you know, stuff that did not get that same representation. And we found that University of North Carolina, for example, their list just blew up for us in terms of sales, and just exposing people to things like Race for Profit. Forget that. I mean, there's a whole realm of them that we ended up just selling, you know, several a week. And I mean, and doing reorders in the midst of a pandemic to North Carolina Press was just blowing my mind. And yeah, I mean, you start finding those presses, and they're not just the local ones to you where you live. You start finding those presses that really speak to you individually and your store. So like for us, you know, it kind of moves in waves. You know, North Carolina, you know, we'll go heavy on a backlist, and, you know, it might take a while to sell through my overbuy, and then we might move over to Georgia. And it just, I don't know, I actually kind of treat increasingly, you know, the university press buying seasons as a, you know, I think about it in terms of like, which of the university presses is going to get my money this season. So
I think, you know, as we've talked about, because the catalogs are so finely curated, I find that it also makes it easy to discover some of those backlists, because they'll sometimes list them right there with those front list titles, as well as just, and you do this a lot, Patricia, and Will does, and several other UP reps, you know, when something is happening in the news, sending me a list of like, there was this article, and here are these books, you know, that we sell that actually speak, you know, to what is happening right now, or what is being discussed in the mainstream. And those, I live and die by those alerts. I love them. I know they can be a lot. And sometimes reps are just like, we don't want to make it too much. I like much. I'm a more is more kind of gal. And that always, you know, it's all about that discoverability. And that really helps.
I think it's also about deep memory. We cherish the memory that lives in bookseller inventory, rich and layered and really showing many years of work. I know you brought forward Condemnation of Blackness in your display at Changing Hands, the great title from Harvard, Khalil Gibran Muhammad's book. So I think that there's kind of what is new today, what we're bringing back. You mentioned University of Georgia, so I have to show off a book I'm always telling booksellers about from University of Georgia, The Inward Mourning by Henry Bugbee. I'm devoted to this title, and I love that they reissued it at Georgia. I think we all have personal faves. Maybe we'll have a minute if anyone has more to bring around. I have to say I was particularly glad that Shelf Awareness decided to star a Syracuse University Press novel this morning. They brought forward Revolutions of All Colors by Duane Faria. I already have it in one of my indie baskets, and I think they did it for us. So I'm wondering if anyone else has some fun books they want to show off that they might have, just want to talk about.
Just wanted to jump in and remind that we hit 3 o'clock. So if we could just finish up, or if there's like questions, just in case, so we don't miss anybody.
All right. Well, we have talked to our comments and excitement about Georgia's hog book. I love that. And I guess, shall we wrap it up? I just want to tell you how delighted I am to be in conversation with such great booksellers from all over the country. I'm very, very fortunate to get to do University Press in the West for Yale and Princeton. And I might finish with a quotation that has really been on my mind. It's from Christy Henry at Princeton. We have a responsibility to change the narrative of human experience. I feel such idealism from booksellers, and I feel that that's what we're doing constantly, is to come up to this moment. So thank you very, very much.